All right. Hello and welcome everybody to the 15th class we have on the Jewish life cycle. And it's an interesting title. Certainly doesn't seem to fit. We have today's class is called Shanarishona and Divorce. Now, the two are not obviously necessarily one following the other. But they're also not mutually exclusive. Let's explain. So Shana Rishona, not very well known, is actually a Torah level halacha. There is a law in the Torah. There's a verse in the Torah. Let me just get everything ready here for a moment. There's a verse in the Torah that mentions. It's in Devarim 24. So it says over there, and it's not a parsha class, but it's worth seeing that that a Jewish soldier in his first year of being married is patur, is exempt from going to military service. There is something about that first year of marriage that Torah law wants us. The Torah law wants us to keep special. So we call that Shana Rishona, and there are certainly rabbinical laws that have been established to boost the Torah's level of responsibility. So the Chinuch, the Sephirah Chinuch, which is an ancient, actually somewhat anonymous work that was written in the order of the mitzvot. So in the 582nd mitzvah, almost at the end of the Torah, obviously, it talks about Shana Rishona and talks about why we have it and what its obligations are, how much of it is rabbinic, how much of it is from the Torah. But certainly some of the more famous things to know about the first year is that the husband and wife are supposed to be in the same city the entire year. That's a rabbinic commandment. And there are obviously exceptions. If somebody has to travel somewhere and his wife or can't come with him, or if she needs to travel somewhere and he can't come with her, there are reasons to make exceptions. But it's all based on this idea that the first year of marriage is supposed to be very special. It's supposed to be. Now, this is the connection between the first part of the class and the second part of the class. The point is to create a strong chiba, a strong relationship between the two, a strong love that will not be interrupted by anything else. They're supposed to eat together, they're supposed to spend a lot of time together, they're supposed to really get to know each other. Now, this is assuming, of course, the Torah is assuming that they don't already know each other very well. They know each other enough to have a relationship, enough to start a love relationship. But love is something that, according to the Torah, is something that gathers speed as time progresses, like a snowball. Right? It gets greater with more time. So the most important thing, as we mentioned before, in the dating class, the most important thing for two people to find is some sort of mutual bond that they think can grow. Obviously, they don't know, and that's going to be part of the next part of the class, right? Sometimes they're wrong, but they think that they can find love, and if they can, that's great. And then so that they can be married for 120 years, But the Shana Rishona, that first year, is supposed to be very special in many communities. If it's possible, a boy sometimes learns in yeshiva in Israel or whatever during that first year, and obviously his wife comes along, right? That's part of, they have to be together, and it's a very important, very special year. What I wanted to add to that is so there is an argument whether this mitzvah still applies today. If God forbid war breaks out and a Jewish soldier has to go fight. Does the army honor this Torah edict? So, as we know, the state of Israel is currently not always in accordance with halacha. There's some certain arguments and different opinions, but certainly the army tries to best it can. It tries to honor this idea that the soldier should not go fight in his first year of marriage. But there's also psychological reasons for that. It's not just because of Torah law. And by the way, obviously, if she knows that he's a soldier and knows that he's going to be taking part in war, there are certain exceptions. The Aruch HaShulchan writes, actually, the Chatam Sofer writes that also the Aruch HaShulchan, like I said, says same thing is true if she marries a camel driver, a traveling salesman. She knows he's going to be away a lot. That's obviously that's part of the deal. And if she's okay with that, so obviously that makes an exception. And obviously he's allowed to do his work and earn his money, which is part of the obligations of a husband. Now, interestingly enough, this week's Parsha tells us quite a bit about the obligation of marriage. And part of knowing what the obligation is has a lot to do with avoiding divorce. Divorce is it can be a mitzvah, by the way, right? There are times when it's good for people to divorce, when one of the spouses is abusive, or when being together is something that's somehow detrimental to one or the other, or detrimental to the children. Obviously, it's been obviously taboo for a long time. Jewish divorce rates were historically were very, very low until quite recently. And there's a number of reasons for this, some good and some bad. Obviously, we'll get to that. I'm sort of jumping ahead here, but understanding what the obligations are of a husband to a wife might help us understand why divorce happens sometimes. It's because the two spouses never got to the level that they're supposed to be on, based on what they're supposed to do for each other. What should they do for each other? So in the Ketubah, we learn actually in this week's Parsha what some of the responsibilities are for a man to his wife, and among them, so we learn from the fact that it says in the very beginning of the Parsha, it talks about a case of a Jewish man who had to sell himself into slavery. So if he actually became a slave, and I know this is not a Parsha class, you don't have to tell me. So even if he sold himself into slavery and he was married at the time, his wife comes with him. Now, Rav Hirsch makes a sort of a big deal about this. He says if he is married, his wife enters together with him, but the wife's status cannot be that of a servant to the master. As stated above, even for her own theft, a woman is no woman is sold. So she's not supposed to in any way suffer. But why is she coming along with him? Why is she sort of dragged into this? It's because part of the responsibility he has is to support her. One of the main things that a husband has to do for his wife is he has the responsibility to support his wife. He also has the responsibility of making sure she's happy and fed, and that she's clothed, and that she has a home, and that she is also physically pleased. And all of these things are obligatory on him. And so if you don't have those things, you'll have reasons for divorce. It's interesting. I looked up today the most common reasons for divorce, and they list 13 in this particular website, which is strange because a lot of these are actually pretty similar. So the number one, 75% of divorces are caused by a lack of commitment, right? And 59.6% are caused by infidelity. Now, I don't know how that works percentage-wise. I don't know. It's 70. I mean, it could be like there's a mixture. There's a number of things, but I don't know the difference between lack of commitment and infidelity. Like commitment to what? Commitment to the marriage, right? So that's why people have affairs, because they're not committed to the marriage. Right? So it seems to me it's pretty much the same thing, more or less. Then the number 3 reason is conflicts / irreconcilable differences, and obviously there's supposed to be a respect. Judaism requires a certain respect that a man has for his wife, that a wife has for her husband. In fact, the Gemara tells us that a husband has to have more respect for his wife than he does for himself. And that's, by the way, very unique in terms of certainly ancient religions, and in most modern religions too, by the way. So another reason they say is marrying too young. So again, there is a maturity level that is sometimes lacking in marriage, and that comes to the fore quite quickly. A wife comes home from a long day of working, and she finds her husband, on the computer playing video games, and nothing's done, and there's a big mess all around. So he's a child. He's playing video games. He hasn't matured to the level where he has realized his financial and respect responsibilities and domestic responsibilities in the home. Now, I would add to this the conflict, irreconcilable differences. A lot of those happen because there's a difference of opinion about the roles of the husband and wife. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole feminist issue and all that. I think it's very important. I think there's the feminism certainly in the last 50, 60 years has served a very important purpose, especially in America, where women were definitely not treated correctly. No question about that. But on the whole, whether it's the woman's role to do such a thing or a man's role to do such a thing, I'm not talking about that. The most important thing for a husband and wife is to decide amongst each other what their responsibilities are, right? So A does the laundry, B washes the dishes, whatever it is. A can do both, B can do both. It doesn't matter what those roles are, as long as they agree on them way in advance. Right? This shouldn't pop up on their first full day of being married. She says to him, I decided unilaterally that you'll be washing the dishes from now on. That's not how that works. You're supposed to have a discussion. You're supposed to have, hopefully this discussion even happens in some way before the marriage. And a lot of it has to do with what they've seen in their own homes growing up. The next very popular reason for divorce is money issues or debt, which is part of the reason why we saw a huge increase in divorces during times of recession, during the times of the Depression. It was a very interesting, because some of us lived through the 2008 recession, so it very much affected some of us quite a bit. And so we saw how strong a marriage is by how they reacted to these financial stresses. Now, I'm not saying the people who got divorced at that time shouldn't have. They might have other issues could have come to the fore, which is why this happened. Obviously, there are times for divorce, including this next reason, domestic violence. Now, this isn't just physical violence. This could also be emotional violence. And obviously, that's a reason that they for sure should get divorced. should for sure get divorced. There's no reason for one person to feel abused by another. If there's no way to get therapy, if there's no way to calm an angry person down, if there's nothing that can be done in that situation, for sure they should not stay together. Or if their argument is, oh, we'll stay together for the sake of the children, well, it's not good for the children to see, a spouse, one of their parents, being abused. That's not acceptable. So in those sorts of situations, for sure, divorce is a mitzvah, actually, it should not be looked down upon at all, and is definitely an important thing. Another common reason for divorce is our health problems, mental illness. This is kind of interesting because the Gentiles, when they make their wedding vows, what do they say? In sickness or in health, right? but we know that usually when people get sick, it's a huge strain in the relationship, and people just don't want to deal with it. I know people, I know people who, when a spouse got sick, the other spouse said, I just can't handle it. It's too much for me. Besides, we don't get along anyway for whatever other reasons, for other irreconcilable differences. I don't want to end up taking care of a sick person. That's not how I want to enjoy my golden years or something. So that happens. Lack of support from family. That's very common reason to divorce. Obviously, if family, if the in-laws treat you like an outlaw, then you have a lot of reason to be resentful of the marriage, and there's going to be the reasons are going to keep popping up for why to divorce. And the last of the most common reasons that people get divorced nowadays is religious in nature. Religious differences, lack of marital and lack of marital education, not related topics, but so yes. So in terms of marital education, obviously, people who aren't studying, there's no laws of marriage, but if you see that your situation is getting rocky and you're not seeing therapy, or you're not reading a book to try to fix it, then obviously you're not invested enough in this. Religious difference is also a very common reason for divorce, and it's related to also the family not accepting you, and also probably related to the different upbringing, right? For somebody who grew up Catholic is going to have a very different idea of what family should be like, and what my role is as a spouse, as a mother, father, etc. Is very different from, say, a Muslim perspective of the same thing. So yeah, they fell in love. They met in college. They like each other. They're attracted to each other. So they get hitched. They get married, and then situations keep popping up where the stress is just rising and rising, and they never find the ultimate shalom bayit, the ultimate bliss that is a very important goal of a Jewish marriage. Which is why, if you remember, a lot of the things we talked about, starting from dating all the way up to now, a lot of the things we mentioned were all about finding a way to have shalom bayit. Now, Rabbi Eliyahu Kitov writes in The Jew and His Home. That's the English translation of a sefer. So he writes about shalom bayit. So he says, a Jewish home may be distinguished by a number of characteristics having to do with religious observance and ethical practices. These practices are numerous, and he goes on and gives a few examples. So then he says, people vary widely in their attitude towards shalom, though, towards peace. There are those who are always quarreling with both relatives and strangers. They are the most blameworthy. At the opposite pole are those praiseworthy people who are always at peace with everyone. Between these two extremes, people fall into two categories: those who get along with strangers, but not with friends and relatives, and vice versa. The behavior of those who are at peace with friends and relatives, but not with strangers, is a first step on the way to true peace. A person who is friendly with strangers but has not yet passed the test of shalom, for he may be motivated by praise or self-interest. Perhaps he can be friendly disposed to the stranger simply because of infrequent contact with him. At home, the same person may flare up with the slightest provocation. Home is the true test of shalom. The person who can keep his temper under control, and home really is dominated by the desire for shalom. So that's one of the most important things in terms of that whole irreconcilable differences, these constant fighting and bickering that many spouses have, is really the part of the reason is that their goal isn't shalom. If you want to have peace, if that's your goal, if you really, and that should be, by the way, and it's something that you need to constantly work towards. It's been mentioned. I've said it before. I think I said it in the name of Reb Shlomo Karlbach, but peace is very fascinating. Peace and shalom, those things, they don't come naturally. And even if you want to be very friendly and you come home with a positive attitude, that doesn't guarantee that your spouse is going to have a positive attitude. So maybe somebody wants to pick a fight with you. That happens. So shalom is something that has to happen almost miraculously. And you have to pray for it. You have to aim for it. You have to work towards it. And you certainly have to pray for it, which is why it's no coincidence at all that shalom is the end of almost all of our major prayers. It's the end of the Shemona Esrei, and it's the end of Birkat Hamazon. Shalom is that important, and I obviously that is a huge reason why people divorce, is that they don't have shalom in the home, and it's something that people need to work on. A few years ago, one of my daughters had her friends from class have a little Shabbaton, a mini Shabbaton at our shul. And part of the entertainment for the Shabbaton was a Q&A with me. I don't know how entertaining that was, but anyway, the number one question that they wanted to know about was divorce. Why? Because of my daughter's class at that time, she was the only one from a family that wasn't divorced. The only one. There's eight, 9 girls. All of them, I think all of them, maybe with a couple of exceptions, maybe, all had divorce in their family. Now, I'm not saying the families shouldn't have divorced, but one of the things I started with was the famous Gemara at the end of the Gemara Gittin. Gittin is a Gemara, is a tractate about Gittin, about divorce, about get. So a get is a divorce document, and that's what the tractate is about. And the very, very end of the Gemara mentions the idea that the altar, in the Beit Hamikdash, the altar in which we gave sacrifices, would shed tears when somebody divorced his first wife. Specifically, first wife. We're not going to get into this. Is back when people, as should still be the case, people married more than once if they were divorced. Divorce shouldn't be the end of your life. I'm divorced, so I'm never going to get married again. Most people who divorce or become widowers should get remarried if possible. You're not old trash. You're not useless or without a pointless life now that I don't have a spouse. That's not the correct attitude. That's not the Jewish attitude. We try to marry again. Now, and so the Gemara, like I said, in Gittin 90b tells us that the altar sheds tears for the one who divorces his first wife. And I mentioned this to this group of girls, and one of the first things they asked, like almost immediately as soon as I said that, was, Well, if the altar doesn't want us to get divorced, why does the Torah allow it? Why is there divorce? Why is there a whole tractate telling me how to divorce? And then at the end you say, don't do it. So there are a couple of very important reasons, and some of them I've already hinted to. One of them is divorce, like I said, is a mitzvah and is sometimes very necessary, and it would be bad not to divorce. Like in those cases of domestic violence, in cases where somebody, changes their philosophy completely, and it will negatively affect the family, etc. Right? So whatever it is, divorce is sometimes necessary. It's sad. I mean, people who could have loved each other, who thought they were going to love each other, were wrong. Right? That part is sad. But on the other hand, they need to divorce because it's important. So it's important to have that law. Now, some of you might have heard that on that same page in the Gemara, it also gives the opinion. I believe this is Hillel, if I'm not mistaken, or Akiva. I forget who says this now, but somebody says that if your wife burns the soup, then you should divorce. Now, I don't know if you're thinking what I'm thinking, but that's a pretty pathetic reason to divorce. Burnt soup. So the commentaries explain that if you want to divorce your wife because she burns your soup, you should have been divorced. You shouldn't have been married. You're not mature enough to marry her. You're not ready to be a husband if you have a freak out because your soup is burnt. Then it's not, marriage is not for you yet. And there's a lot more growing up you need to do. Can
you be upset at yourself when you burn soup?
You can always be upset. You can always be upset.
The soup's burned.
You should not. You should not have a freak out when you burn your soup. It shouldn't go throwing pots and pans all over the house.
Don't let the barley stay at the bottom, guys. Don't let it.
Yes. Barley is blame the barley. Blame the barley. All right. So the marriage began. Now we're going to have to dip at least a little bit into some controversy, and that's okay, because that's what we do here. A marriage is begun by is performed halachically, right? That was the whole point of what do you say to your wife? What do you say to the bride when you give her the ring? Kedat Moshe Israel. You are my wife according to halacha, according to Jewish law. So too, a divorce has to be done also by halacha. You can't just have a secular divorce and say, I did it. So it says the word divorce on this paper, so I'm divorced. That's not how it works. There is a halachic process for it, and you need to follow it completely. And it's intense. I've been the witness to several gittin, to several divorces, and it's a very sad process, but also very necessary. Like I said, it is a mitzvah and it has to be done correctly. So, for example, a get has to be written by a sofer on cloth, on not on paper, but on what's it called? On
parchment.
Yeah, that's the word. Thank you. Parchment. And my words leave me sometimes. So it has to be written on parchment. It has to be written with the same kind of pen that a Sefer Torah is written with. It has to be, like I said, written by a sofer. It has to have a certain amount of lines, 12, by the way. It's an easy thing to remember, by the way, because it's the same as the gematria for the word get. Get is Gimel Tet, which is 3 plus 9, and that's 12. You're welcome. I did the math for you. So so yes, a divorce has to be performed that way, and there has to be a certain rip done in it. The husband has to initiate it. That's where some of the controversy is about to come up. A husband has to initiate it, just like he initiated the wedding, right? He has to initiate the get. The mitzvah is his. He has to do it. She has to accept, as opposed to all other religions, by the way, where if a man wants to divorce his wife, he tells her, get out, and then she has to leave or whatever. I don't know what the process is, but in Jewish law, a woman has to accept the get. She has to actually pick it up and do a kinyan with it. She has to, just like she did it with the ring, she has to do the same thing with this document. She has to be a participant in this, an equal participant in this. Now, the controversy.
Nope. I've let you see the controversy.
The controversy has to do with something called an aguna, which you may or may not have heard of. And that is somebody who married his wife and then refused to divorce her when she wanted a divorce. Now, there is no way to for her to initiate the divorce. However, he must initiate it. And Chazal have a whole process of how to convince him to do it. There's all kinds of social measures that are supposed to be taken. He's not supposed to be given aliyahs. No one's supposed to do business with him. He's supposed to maybe even be sort of imprisoned or basically threatened, and in some cases even beat up physically until he actually ends up giving her a divorce. Now, in the last, I would want to say, 30 or 40 years, a very controversial topic. This has sparked a lot of controversy because certain men have tried to use halacha against itself, right? The proper procedure is your wife asks you for a divorce, and if there are irreconcilable differences, or if for whatever reason it's for sure that there needs to be a divorce, the man should give her a divorce. There shouldn't be any reason to hold back. In those cases when a man holds back and does not give his wife a divorce, in the last few years, in the last 30, 40 years, I'm not really sure what the numbers are. I'm sort of kind of making them up a little bit. There's become a whole group of women who have not been able to receive a divorce from their husbands. They've either escaped to another country, usually Israel or somewhere else, and have refused to give their wives a divorce. And then these wives are stuck. They're not satisfied. They're not happy in their marriage because they're married to a guy who's not even there. And they can't get remarried because they're in this marriage. So there's been very little that can be done for such cases. Now, one thing that can be done, or that was done, that shouldn't, I don't know, should or shouldn't. I'm not gonna put my foot in my mouth here. But one thing that used to be done, there used to be an organization, a sort of like secret organization in the East Coast that would come up to these husbands and would sort of beat them up until they would agree to divorce their wives. Now, they would sort of like almost like kidnap them and beat them or whatever else they had to do. Now, obviously, this is against American law. And so what had eventually happened was that one of these husbands, or at least one, maybe even more, sued and won. And this person, this rabbi who was heading this organization, was put in jail. So we have to balance halacha with American law sometimes, and sometimes people have been able to use American law against halacha, right? Sort of like make this kind of conflict. So what can be done? So all kinds of reform measures have been tried, with making it so that women can initiate a divorce, et cetera, et cetera. These do not work in halacha, because again, the mitzvah is the man's, as we said before. So there's no way to change that. However, in the last few years, there have been organizations sprouting out, especially on the East Coast, actually all over, thanks to Facebook and other social media, that basically what they do is they gather large groups of people to protest outside the man's home /business / social activities to the point where he is finally shamed into agreeing to divorce his wife. And they've been rather successful in the last few years. And I've read an article recently about them. It's social pressure, especially now in the age of social media. It can be a very, very powerful thing. And so that's one possible solution. Hopefully this will work to make sure that this problem of agunot disappears forever, God willing. Shana, you had a question?
Oh no, I was like, I mean, you see like a lot of like the controversy stuff over here. It's very hard. Like like babysitting for a family or whatever, and the father's not giving a get to the mom, and it's just very hard for the kids.
Yeah, it's hard for everyone. It's hard for the mom. It's hard for the kids. And part of the reason why we're going to talk about this actually in the Parsha class, believe it or not. But part of the worst thing is very often, at least somebody from this whole relationship is going to go off the derech. Is going to stop being observant. Is going to stop being Jewish, because like halacha is not helping me. Halacha is again. How could God make a law that's bad for me, right? And it's a very, very difficult issue. And the fact is, it's not the halacha that's wrong. The halacha is beautiful. It's people using the halacha against itself.
Right. Have you, I don't know, like ever seen that women refuse like to have a divorce? I mean, maybe it's just because like it gets more on the man, but I always hear in the news or something like a guy won't give a get to his wife.
No, I've never heard of that. I would imagine part of the reason, let's be honest, part of the reason why a man doesn't want to give a get is not just because of the shame of it, but because it's also, and besides the fact that it's an admission that he did something wrong, probably, right? Which is why his wife wants to get. But it's expensive, right? In the ketubah, there's a promise of money. It's like, what, $20,000, whatever it is. Not everybody has that, just like floating around. So there's money involved. For the woman, it's the exact opposite. So if she's offered a divorce, she's being offered money. She's being offered support. It's not. Why would she want to refuse that? Does she think she's going to be able to work things out? So let's try to work things out. If he says it's not going to work out, like why would she refuse? It's not. It's important to understand when people refuse to give a divorce, it's not just just caprice. It's not just I feel like not giving a divorce. It's they have other motivation. They have other motives not to give a divorce, and again they're using halacha against itself. And like I said, there are solutions to this problem. It's an interesting, one of the most famous Rambams, one of a principle of Jewish law, very important Rambam. It has to do with divorce. And that is, we know that you can't force a person to do a mitzvah. If you don't want to put on tefillin, if I beat you to the ground and strap tefillin on you, you did not fulfill a mitzvah. I didn't fulfill a mitzvah. Nobody fulfilled anything. Absolutely nothing was done. You don't want to eat your suda for Purim. If I force feed you, nobody gets a mitzvah at all. So that's usually how things work. But in terms of divorce, the Rambam writes, and I think we've mentioned this in another context, the Rambam writes that the Beit Din can beat the person until he gives a divorce. What do you mean? You just forced him to do a mitzvah. How does that work? So says the Rambam, you didn't force him to do the mitzvah. He has inside him a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, like all people. We have a good inclination and an evil inclination. And his good inclination wants to do good, wants to do mitzvot. The mitzvah now is to give the divorce. His evil inclination wants him not to do the right thing. So his evil inclination is saying, no, don't give the get, don't give the get, don't give the get. Okay? And then when this person gets beaten or compelled into giving the divorce, he's supposed to say, I want to give the divorce. You're just making him say these words. So that doesn't work, does it? In this case, it does, because half of him does want to. His Yetzer Tov does want to. So he says, I do want to give a divorce. He goes through the whole process with the Beit Din, with the Sofer and the witnesses and everything else, and he gives a divorce. Yes, by the way, like I said before, the get needs to have witnesses. Your name has to be written on it, just like your name was written on the ketubah. It has to be your correct name. Any other nicknames you use, just like the ketubah, same ideas, and for the same reasons. It takes a long time for divorce to happen, by the way. It's not like chick-chock. First of all, I mean, especially where we live, we don't have a sofer who writes gittin. You have to have a special expert who knows how to write a get. And there are very, very few of these. Somebody actually, when I first got my smicha, somebody said that's a job that I should have. I should be a sofer flying around writing gittin. I'm like, no, thank you. That would be a very depressing way to make my living. As much as it's a mitzvah, and I can do other mitzvot, Chevra Kadisha, okay, but writing gittin, I don't want. It's very sad. I've witnessed them before. It's a very, very sad event. Even people who are sure they don't love each other anymore, sure they don't want to get divorced anymore. Once they get into the actual process, they eventually, at least at some point, start crying. It's guaranteed. They have regrets about divorcing, or they have regrets about marrying to begin with, or they have regrets that they didn't divorce earlier and that they have children and there's going to be an effect on them, etc. Yes, divorce affects children, which is one of the reasons why it was so rare in the past, is that people were afraid how this is going to affect the children. But since it's so common nowadays, for better or for worse, and I said I was going to talk about that, and I haven't done so yet. But for better or for worse, divorce is so common now that the children aren't really so negatively affected by it. Your parents are divorced, my parents are divorced. It's become a common thing, more or less. And of course, it's not that simple. Obviously, there's still tension. There's still family events. The spouse comes with their new spouse to the bar mitzvah, or whatever, and it's awkward. It's probably difficult for people to see. Obviously, hopefully, if they've got the right midot, they want the best for each other even after they're divorced. But that doesn't always happen. Divorces aren't always friendly, as we've noticed. I was going to talk about, as promised, I was going to talk about the sort of benefits of the fact that there's more divorces nowadays. One of the benefits is, like we said, it's not taboo. And so people are more likely to get divorced if there's abuse, which is good. They should not be abused. And people in the past sometimes lived in many, many years in misery because they thought that was the right thing to do for the kids or whatever. So obviously that's incorrect. Aside from that, there are, like we said, a lot of good reasons to be divorced. And if it's taboo, if it's something that we shouldn't talk about it. Oh, I don't want to marry somebody who's a product of divorce, or all these kinds of little anxieties that we have about divorce. It's not fruitful. It's not productive. People need to know. People need to live in healthy, non-toxic relationships, and mutually loving and giving, et cetera, et cetera. And if they're not, then they have to work on that. There needs to be shalom bayit. and we've gotten to the point where people are getting married too young in the Gentile world too, apparently, but people are getting married too young and not mature, and they're sort of forced into it for this by the shidduch machine that's going on, and it's wrong, and they should not have been married, and maybe they should divorce. They can remarry if they find that they love each other afterwards or whatever, assuming the boy's not a Kohen. They can remarry as long as they didn't marry somebody else in between. But it's there has to be a solution to this problem of divorce. The reason for the tear, I mentioned that there's a tear in the document. The reason for the tear is that it's to indicate that this divorce has been used and this woman is divorced, and that and that this particular get cannot be used again. There used to be a concern that somebody would use the same document to say that they're divorced from another husband, a future husband. Let's say he had the same name. Let's say a woman married I don't know, David, and then married again. Her second husband's name is also David. It's possible, right? So it's so in case she wants to say that she's not married to him and she really is, in case he didn't want to give her a divorce or hasn't given her a divorce yet, and she wants to remarry to a third man, she can say, "Oh, look, I have a document. I have a get. It's has a name on it." So no, it's already been used. You can't say that it's a new get. For 92 days after a get, a woman should not remarry. 92 days, that's 3 months. Why? Because just in case she's pregnant from the man whom she just had a divorce from whom she just had a divorce. Sorry, my grammar's not so good. So if just in case she became pregnant from the man whom she just had, from whom she was divorced, we don't want her to marry somebody else and not know whose child that is. So for 92 days, it's 3 months. After 3 months, we can be pretty sure whether she's pregnant or not, and then we wouldn't have the problem, and she can marry anyone she wants, assuming it's not a Kohen. Right. Okay, I don't think we're gonna really talk much about halitza. It's not. I guess we should mention it. It is part of the Jewish life cycle for some people, but let's mention that last. Let's get to that last. I think I have some more things to say about divorce. In To Be a Jewish Woman, Lisa Aiken writes, Judaism prefers adults to be married, and that's why she says why the Talmud says that, and the Talmud extols the virtues of marriage. For example, it says, any man who has no wife lives without joy, without blessing, without goodness, without Torah, without a protecting wall, and without peace. Any man who has no wife is not a proper man. So divorce, so marriage is a very important thing. There's a big stress on men to get married. And but we know, she continues, that not everybody's compatible. Not everybody's going to fit. They might not make each other happy. And that's an important thing. Especially the husband has an obligation to make his wife happy. And so if he's not making her happy, then they should divorce. If they can't live in harmony, if they can't live in peace, if they don't have that shalom bayit we were talking about before, that's when they have to get a divorce. Now, of course,
That rhymed.
Sorry?
That rhymed?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it was random.
Yeah, I know. I noticed it rhymed too, but then I felt bad. wasn't supposed to rhyme. This isn't a happy class. So a divorce must be formalized with a written document called the get. As we said before, the get, by the way, is in Aramaic. That's worth mentioning. The Ashkenazim have the custom of writing the get from scratch in the beginning of the divorce proceedings. The Sephardic custom is to basically have a set text already written down. The only thing missing are the names, and so they just write in the names, kind of like a ketubah, very similar. I just want to, if I may, I'd like to read you the English translation of the Aramaic in the get. This is, by the way, like I said, printed in To Be a Jewish Woman. This is on page 201. So on the blank day of the week, the blank day of the month of blank, in the year blank, from the creation of the world, according to the reckoning of the calendar that we are accustomed to count here in the city of blank, which is located on the river and situated near the wells of water. You should, by the way, supposed to always connect a place where you live to a body of water, because we sustain life through the water. That's one of the reasons why big cities are usually near large bodies of water. So do willingly consent, being under no restraint. This is, by the way, some of the questions the Beit Din asks the person when he's getting divorced. Is anybody forcing you to do this? Does anybody have a gun to your head? And they have to obviously answer to the negative. Right? I'm willingly doing this. No restraint, no release. I set free and put aside you, my wife, and it has to be the woman's name, daughter of, and then her father's name, who is today in the city of, and then the name of the city, which is located on the river and situated near the wells of water, etc., who has been my wife from before. Thus do I set free, release you, put you aside, in order that you may have permission and authority over yourself to go and marry any man you desire. This is, by the way, has to be read to him and translated. And I've seen, this is the point where some men have cried, right? This is where they realize that their wife who has been, I don't know how many years they've been married, it depends. Obviously, she's now nobody to him, like nobody, like an old friend at best, right? And no person may hinder you from this day forth. You are permitted to every man. This shall be for you my bill of dismissal, a letter of release, a document of freedom in accordance with the laws of Moshe and Yisrael. Again, that phrase of Moshe and Yisrael, just like that's like that phrase started the marriage. That's the same phrase that ends the marriage, because a marriage and a divorce have to be done halachically. Now, I've also seen, and I don't know why it doesn't have it here, but oh yeah, it does say it. So you also the Beit Din and the document, when it's written has to mention the man's name and the father's name, and that's also very could be very emotional for somebody whose parents never divorced, to like have to mention their parents' name. You know, I'm the son of this person who didn't have to divorce, who had it, more or less, or had a peaceful home, more or less, theoretically, right? And yet look at me, look how far we've come that we have to divorce. So it's like I said, could be very, very sad event, but on the other hand, I've seen, I saw one person who was recently divorced, not so recently anymore. On her Facebook, somebody mentioned, I'm sorry that you're divorced. I'm sorry, my condolences, something like that. And she responded, "Why are you sad? I'm very glad that we got divorced. We should have been divorced earlier." Right? That's my only regret. And she has a point, right? Some marriages were not meant to happen, and there's a sense of liberty, of freedom, when you're no longer chained to somebody who is emotionally / physically abusive, or anything like that. Another solution that should be mentioned before we go too much further, another solution to the Guna problem has been suggested all the way back in 1983 by the RCA, Rabbinical Council of America, and that is the prenuptial agreement. In the prenuptial agreement, it's a legally binding document which greatly enhances the power of the Beit Din within state law. So it ties in to state law the decision of the Jewish court. The Beit Din, if they say that this family should be divorced, that sort of compels state law, and this is in New York mostly, to sort of force this. At least legally, force the husband to perform a get, because the Beit Din are basically have been in the prenuptial agreement have been assigned as what's called arbitrators. So it's sort of their decision what happens to the marriage, and that's why a lot of people suggest, urge / almost force you to sign a prenuptial agreement before you marry, a halachic prenuptial agreement, that is, and that's very important. Since we're on the subject of divorce, we might as well also mention a related topic, and that's halitza, as mentioned before. When a man dies, God forbid, and he had no children, God forbid, and he was married, and now his wife is obligated to marry his sibling, his next brother, assuming all kinds of factors. We're not going to get into the Gemara right now, but assuming no other factors, that's called yibum. And under yibum, he has to marry her. He has an obligation, and she actually is obligated to marry him as well. And somehow, spiritually speaking, the Ramban talks about this in Chumash. He says that spiritually speaking, somehow the soul of the dead husband will become the soul of the child that they have together. How that happens, why that works, don't ask me. You can ask the Ramban, but that's what happens. If they refuse, there is a process called halitza, where he takes off a special shoe. It's not just any shoe. It's basically, it looks like tefillin. Looks like a tefillin strap with the bottom of a sandal attached to it. It's all from one piece of leather. It's white, and he's supposed to put it on his foot. He's supposed to strap it around his leg, also 7 times, by the way. He's supposed to take it off, and she's supposed to spit in it. That's it. He doesn't put it back on or anything else. And that's part of the halitza process, as based on Devarim 25, verses 7 through 10. Now, the reason for that is because he's refusing to have his brother's soul come back to the world, whatever that means. But rabbinic law actually requires that they have to do halitza. They can't do yibum. According to the rabbis nowadays, we're no longer on the level where we'll really appreciate why we're doing what we're doing, and it'll just be a regular marriage for people, and we don't want that. It needs to be a special marriage for the sake of bringing a soul back to the world, and that's what it's for. And then, therefore, because people don't have that intent anymore, that whole mitzvah, according to the rabbis, is not currently applicable, not until we become much more spiritually attuned. So meanwhile, until Mashiach comes, we don't have the mitzvah of yibum. We instead always do halitza. I remember a few years ago, a very popular secular Israeli movie, I should say, was all about this this young girl who was dating, and she couldn't find the right mate, et cetera, et cetera. And then her older sister, was married, and her older sister died. Okay. And so the entire family put pressure on her to marry her sister's widower. Sorry. This has nothing to do with halacha. There's no such thing in any Jewish society that I know of where that would actually happen, where somebody would put pressure on a girl to marry her sister's widower or anything like that. That's not how that kind of thing works. If she wants to marry him, Gesundheit, hey, she can. There's no problem her marrying her sister's widower. There's only a problem of him being married to both of them in the same time. But once one of them passes away, which is the case here, he can marry her if he wants to, and she can marry him if she wants to. But there's no such thing as putting pressure on somebody to do such a thing. And anyway, if you remember our class from a few days ago, or a few weeks ago now, there should never be pressure on somebody to marry somebody else. What that will usually end up with is some kind of resentment that will probably lead to divorce eventually. And if not divorce, then just a miserable marriage, which is just as bad, if not worse. So in conclusion, we're a little over time here. In conclusion, obviously we want all marriages to be successful and people to be happy. But if there's no shalom, or if there's any kind of abuse or mental illness or anything like that, then the husband has a mitzvah to give his wife a divorce. And the divorce should not be something that's looked down upon. Nobody should poo-poo this family. How dare they get a divorce? No, they divorced. They should move on. They can get remarried if they want to. They should. People shouldn't be alone. We talked about that earlier, obviously. So, but that's the next part in the Jewish life cycle, is once they're married and they're successful and they have shalom bayit, how exactly should they build their house? Did you know there are halachot about that? That's right. There's all kinds of laws about what to do, what to first do when you first get a house, when to put out the mezuzah, all these things. I think that's part of the Jewish life cycle, and that's going to be in our next class. I'm going to stop the live stream and the recording to see if there's